The conference room smelled like leather and condescension, and I sat at the far end of the table in a shirt I'd owned for 11 years, watching my father-in-law explain to a full room of suits why the Alcott building on 5th needed to be acquired before the end of the quarter. He didn't know I owned it. He didn't know I owned a lot of things. My name is Norman Stafford. I'm 64 years old. I drive a 2009 Chevy pickup with a cracked dashboard and a heater that takes 10 minutes to kick in during winter. My hands are rough. I worked 31 years as an industrial electrician before I quietly stepped away from that life. Most people who meet me assume I'm still working a trade somewhere, maybe retired on a modest pension, living careful. They're not entirely wrong about the careful part. My wife's name is Judith. We met in 1987 at a hardware store in Dayton, Ohio. She was buying paint rollers. I was buying wire connectors. I'd been making small real estate investments for 3 years by then. Nothing glamorous. A duplex here, a foreclosure there, properties other people didn't want because they needed work and patience. I had both. We married in 1989. She knew I invested in properties. She didn't know the full picture, not because I lied to her, because the full picture kept growing, year by year, in ways that surprised even me, and there never seemed to be a right moment to sit down and say, "Judith, I need to show you something." That's the part I'm not proud of. I want to say that up front. My father-in-law's name is Clifton Hare. He built Hare Commercial Properties from nothing, which he will tell you approximately every 45 minutes if you let him. He's 71. He wears Italian shoes and has his shirts monogrammed, and once told me, at our first Thanksgiving dinner together in 1990, that a man who didn't own a proper suit by 30 had already decided something about himself. I was wearing a Sears blazer that day. I nodded and passed the stuffing. Judith never heard him say things like that. Or if she did, she heard them differently than I did. She loves her father the way daughters sometimes love difficult men, with loyalty that bends around the sharp parts. She always explained him. He grew up with nothing, Norman. He just expresses pride the wrong way. And I understood that. I've never hated Clifton Hare. That's important. What happened between us was never about hate. Our daughter's name is Renee. Wait, no. I have to keep this straight in my head, because people have asked me to tell this story more than once now, and the details matter. Our daughter's name is Audrey. She's 34. She's an occupational therapist in Columbus. She married a man named Shaw, Daniel Shaw, 3 years ago. Shaw is 37, which matters because some people do the math wrong on these things, and I want to be clear. Judith is 58, I'm 64. Audrey is 34, and Clifton is 71. The numbers work. I was 29 when Audrey was born. Judith was 23. Clifton was 37 at the time. Run the math however you like, it holds together. Shaw worked in commercial real estate lending, knew the industry well, smart kid. But Clifton had never been warm to him, either, a different kind of cold than he was to me, more competitive. Like two people who speak the same language and therefore have less patience for each other's accent. Now I need to tell you about the building. In 2003, I bought a commercial property at 1140 Fifth Avenue in a mid-sized Ohio city I won't name, because the people involved still live there. The building was in poor shape. Previous owner had let it run down, couldn't cover the notes. The city was making noise about code violations. I bought it through a holding company, NRS Property Group LLC, for $2.1 million, which was about half what it would have sold for in decent condition. I spent the next 4 years getting it right. New electrical, plumbing, elevator modernization, the kind of work I knew how to evaluate, because I'd spent my career doing it or managing people who did. By 2009, the Alcott building, that's what they called it locally, after the original developer, a name that stuck even though I owned it now, was fully leased. 11 commercial tenants, law firms, a regional insurance company, a dental practice on the ground floor. The thing threw off cash like a well-run machine. By 2019, my total portfolio, the Alcott building plus 9 other commercial and mixed-use properties I'd acquired over 20 years, had an appraised value of just over $60 million. I want to pause there, because I know how that sounds. I know it sounds like I should have told my wife. I should have told her sooner than I did. I know that. I've sat with that knowledge for a long time. The reason I didn't, and I'm not asking you to accept this as a good reason, only as the true one, is that I was afraid of what it would change. Judith and I had built a life together that I loved. We had a house we paid off in 2002. We took road trips. We had a vegetable garden. She taught Sunday school. I coached youth baseball until my knees gave me trouble. Money had never been a source of conflict between us because we lived simply and I kept the portfolio quiet, and I was afraid, genuinely afraid, that if she saw the full number, something would shift. Something in how she looked at our life, or at me. It was selfish. I know. The other reason, the one I'm less comfortable saying out loud, is Clifton. I had known for a long time, that Clifton's opinion of me was fixed. I was the tradesman who married his daughter. The man who drove a used truck and didn't play golf, and I noticed, in a way I couldn't fully explain until years later, that I didn't want his opinion of me to change based on a number. I wanted it to change, if it ever did, because he got to know me. Or not at all. It never changed. Last March, Clifton called a family dinner at his house in Westerville. The house is substantial. 4,000 square feet, 4-car garage, a dining room table that seats 14. He made that call to every family dinner feel like a summons. You arrived at Clifton's table and you understood, without anyone saying so, that you were a guest in his domain. Judith dressed up. She always did for her father's dinners. I wore slacks and a collared shirt, which was as dressed as I got outside a funeral. Audrey and Shaw were already there when we arrived. Audrey looked tired. She'd driven up from Columbus, and the traffic on 270 had been bad. Shaw had brought wine, a bottle of something he'd clearly thought about, which Clifton accepted without looking at the label. We sat down. Clifton's wife, my mother-in-law, Barbara, had made pot roast, which was the one thing she made perfectly, and the one thing Clifton let her do without commentary. The meal started the way those meals always started. Clifton asked Shaw about interest rate trends, barely listened to the answer, and made a comment that was technically a question but functioned as a correction. Then he turned to me. "Norman," he said, cutting his meat without looking up. "I've been meaning to ask you something." "Sure," I said. "We're looking at picking up a property on 5th, the Alcott building. You know it?" I had a piece of bread in my hand. I set it down. "I know it," I said. "Good bones," he said. "Management's been a little slow on upgrades, but the tenant mix is solid. We've made some inquiries. Turns out the ownership structure is one of these LLCs, NRS something, which makes it a little harder to find the principal, but we're working on it." He looked up then directly at me with the expression of a man sharing information he assumed you'd find impressive. "I've got my attorney reaching out this week," I said. Judith was looking at me. She knows my face after 35 years, in ways I can't always account for. I don't know what she saw right then. Clifton moved on. He started talking about a development deal he was putting together in a suburb north of the city, which he expected to generate significant returns, and would Shaw be interested in discussing financing options. Shaw said he'd need to look at the numbers. Clifton said the numbers were solid, which is what people say when they want you to stop asking about the numbers. I sat there and ate my pot roast and listened to my father-in-law discuss acquiring my building, and I made a decision. Not a revenge decision. I want to be careful about that word, because what I felt sitting at that table was not anger, or not only anger. It was something quieter, a kind of tiredness that had been building for 30 years, and a recognition that the moment I'd been putting off, the conversation I'd been avoiding, was no longer something I got to time on my own terms. The next morning I called my attorney, a woman named Gail Ostrowski, who had handled my portfolio for 12 years and who had the particular gift of being unsurprisable. I told her what had happened at dinner. She was quiet for a moment. "You want me to respond to their inquiry?" she said. "I want you to reach out first," I said. "Before they figure it out on their own, to Clifton Hare's office, yes." Another pause. "Norman, does your wife know about NRS?" "Not the full scope," I said. "Not yet. You understand this is going to accelerate that conversation." "I know," I said. "That's part of the reason I'm calling you." Gail sent a letter, not an email, a formal letter on firm letterhead, to Clifton Hare's office the following Tuesday. It identified NRS Property Group LLC and its principal, Norman R. Stafford, as the owner of 1140 Fifth Avenue, and respectfully indicated that Mr. Stafford was not interested in selling at this time. It also noted, because Gail has a precise and occasionally pointed sense of timing, that Mr. Stafford looked forward to discussing the matter further at his convenience. I was at home when Judith's phone rang. I was in the kitchen making coffee. I heard her answer. I heard her say her father's name the way she did when she was surprised. I heard her walk into the living room and close the door partway. When she came out, her face was the kind of still that comes before weather. "Norman?" she said. "Yeah, my father just called. Okay. He says his attorney got a letter." She stopped, started again. "He says the owner of the Alcott building is someone named Norman R. Stafford." She looked at me directly. He thought it was a mistake. I set down my coffee cup. "It's not a mistake." The silence in our kitchen lasted a long time. "I'm not going to dress up what happened next," Judith cried. Not immediately. She held herself very still for a while, asking questions in a careful, measured voice that I recognized as the way she talked when she was working hard not to break. "How long? How much? Why didn't I tell her?" I answered everything. All of it. The full number, the full history, the first duplex in 1984 when I was 23 years old, and working double shifts to scrape together a down payment, all the way up to the current portfolio. When I said the appraised value, she went quiet again. "Why?" she said. Not asking about the money, asking about the silence. I told her the truth, both parts of it. The part about being afraid of what it would change between us, and the part about her father. She listened to all of it without interrupting. That's one of the things I love most about Judith, even when I don't deserve it. She listens. When I finished, she said, "He's going to be impossible about this." "I know. He's going to feel embarrassed." "I know, Norman." She looked at me with an expression I couldn't fully read. "How long have you been waiting for this?" It was a fair question. I thought about it honestly before I answered. "I wasn't waiting for it," I said, "but I'm not surprised it happened." She nodded slowly. Then she picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and she drank it anyway. Clifton called me directly that evening. I'd expected him to wait, to marshal his response, to come at me with something prepared, but he called at 6:47 p.m., which told me he'd been sitting on it all day and couldn't manage it any longer. "Is this true?" he said. No greeting. "Yes. You own that building." "I own it through a holding company, yes. I own 9 other commercial properties as well." The silence on his end was different from Judith's silence. Hers had been hurt and confused. His was, I don't know how else to say this, structural, like something load-bearing had given way. "For how long?" he said. "The Alcott building, since 2003. The portfolio overall, I've been building since 1984. Another silence, then. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I had my reasons," I said. "I'll share them with you in person if you'd like. I offered you." He stopped. I waited. He didn't finish the sentence, but we both knew what was in it. 2 Christmases ago, Clifton had made what he presented as a generous offer. A position in his company, a salaried role, managing a small portfolio of residential rentals he didn't have time for. He'd framed it as an opportunity. He'd used the word opportunity 4 times in 10 minutes. The salary he'd mentioned was $41,000 a year. He'd said it slowly, like he was placing something valuable on a table. I had thanked him and said I was comfortable where I was. He hadn't understood why, and the not understanding had hardened into a kind of contempt that he never quite managed to hide at family dinners. The man who drives the old truck and won't take a good opportunity when it's handed to him. "Clifton," I said, "I'd like to have a conversation with you and Barbara, and with Judith, in person. I think that's the right way to handle this." He said fine. His voice was flat. We met at their house 4 days later. Audrey drove up from Columbus because Judith had called her, and honestly I was glad she was there. She sat next to Judith on the couch and held her mother's hand in a way that reminded me of when Audrey was 10, and Judith had a bad fall, and we spent 6 hours in the emergency room. I sat across from Clifton and Barbara at their dining room table. The same table where he'd told me about the Alc building acquisition plan, and I told them everything I'd already told Judith. The history of the portfolio, the reasoning, the whole picture. Clifton listened without speaking. Barbara asked a few questions, careful ones. In the way she asked questions when she was trying to stay neutral in territory she knew was dangerous. When I finished, Clifton sat with it for a moment. Then he said, "You made me look like a fool." "That wasn't my intention," I said. "You didn't know because I hadn't told anyone, not even Judith. This isn't something I did at you. You sat at my table," he said, "every holiday for 30 years, and you let me believe. I let you believe what you decided," I said, and I said it gently because I meant it gently. "I never told you I was poor. I never told you I was struggling. You made assumptions based on what you saw, and I didn't correct them. I'm not entirely blameless in that. But the conclusions you drew, those were yours. He looked at me for a long time. Barbara put her hand on his arm. Audrey said softly, "Dad." I wasn't sure which of us she meant. I said, "Clifton, I don't want anything from this. I don't want an apology. I don't want you to change. I don't want credit for what I built. I want my wife to know the truth about our finances, which she now knows. And I want to stop sitting at this table, feeling like a man you're tolerating because you love your daughter." He looked down at the table. A long time passed. Barbara said quietly, "Cliff." He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, "The building isn't for sale." "No," I said. "You're sure?" "I'm sure. Your attorney made that clear." He said it without humor but without cruelty either, like a man who was recalibrating. "She did," I said. "But I wanted to tell you in person. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. What happened was smaller than either of those." He nodded, just slightly, and I nodded back, and something shifted that I don't have a precise name for. Not forgiveness exactly. More like the end of a pretense we'd both been maintaining, for different reasons, for a very long time. On the drive home, Judith was quiet for the first 20 minutes. We were on the highway, the winter fields flat and gray on either side, and the heater in my truck was finally running warm the way it does after the engine has been going a while. She said, "You should have told me." "I know. Years ago, Norman. We should have been in this together." "You're right," I said. "I'm sorry." She looked out the window. Then she said, $60 million, 63, at last appraisal, and you drive this truck. I like this truck." She was quiet again. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh but lived in the same neighborhood, and she shook her head slowly. "I need some time," she said. "I know. I'm not." She paused. "I love you. That's not the question. I just need time to figure out how to hold this." "Take whatever you need," I said. "I'll be right here." She reached over and put her hand on mine on the gear shift, and she kept it there for a while without saying anything. The road unrolled ahead of us. The truck's heater ticked and hummed. In the weeks that followed, we did what I'd been afraid all those years of avoiding. We sat down together with Gail, and Judith went through everything. Every property, every LLC, every balance sheet. She had questions that were sharp and good, the kind of questions I should have had a partner asking all along. She hired her own attorney to review the structure, which I thought was exactly right. We rebuilt the thing together, from the foundation up, as a shared understanding. Clifton Hare never apologized. I didn't expect him to. What he did instead was subtler, and I think harder for him. He started asking me questions. Real ones, at first cautiously, and then with something that resembled genuine curiosity, about how I'd structured the LLCs, about how I'd evaluated the Alcott building when the market was soft, about what I looked for in a property that other buyers were walking away from. He didn't become a different man. He was still Clifton. The Italian shoes, the monogrammed shirts, the 30-year habit of being the most important person in the room. But the particular quality of his silence around me changed. It was less like dismissal, more like concentration. Shaw pulled me aside at Easter and said, "Whatever you did, it's working." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said it wasn't a strategy. Shaw said, "I know, that's probably why it worked." Audrey called me on a Wednesday night in April, just to talk. She told me she was proud of me. I told her I wasn't sure I'd earned that. She said, "You've been patient your whole life, Dad. That's earned." I didn't say anything for a moment, and she added, "Also, $63 million, Dad. Come on." And we both laughed, and I thought about how lucky I am to have a daughter who can laugh with me at the absurd parts of a story that also has genuinely painful parts. The Alcott building is still mine. I'm not selling it. I had the lobby renovated last spring, better lighting, updated finishes, and I walked through it on a Tuesday morning in May, in my old jacket, nodding to the woman at the property management desk who has worked in that building for 14 years, and knows me only as the quiet guy from NRS who shows up every few months and doesn't ask for much. That morning I stood in the lobby for a little while, watching people come through the front doors, with their coffees and their bags, and their particular small urgencies, and I thought about the 30-year-old version of myself, who bought a run-down building nobody else wanted, because he believed in good bones and patient work. I thought about Judith's hand, on mine in the truck, on the cold highway, the heater finally running warm, Some things take longer to build than others. The portfolio took decades. The trust I broke with my silence, and have been slowly rebuilding, is taking longer. That's fair. That's how it should work. You don't get to skip the repair because you had good intentions. But I'll tell you this. I walked out of that building on a clear May morning, got into my truck, and felt, for the first time in a long time, like a man who wasn't carrying a secret. Just a man with a truck that takes a while to warm up, and a life he built slowly, and a wife who is still deciding what to do with all of it. I think she's going to be okay with it. I think we're going to be okay. I'm just not rushing her this time.